So far you've heard a bit about the bottom layers of the pyramid, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about the second layer and particularly how that connects up with the higher layers of the pyramid, because that sense of information flowing from the bottom layers through to the top is one of the important principles of it. Chris showed you some examples of how, for the different kinds of assessment that we value, we've given some tangible examples of how you could put that into practice. We also found that teachers really wanted examples of how they could go about assessment that was linked to a particular aspect of the national curriculum, so that you've got a bank of resources there to support you in teaching. That's what these things, focused assessments, are. It's a plan, it's some ideas for an activity, and it has a particular focus for assessment. That doesn't mean it is a test as such. It doesn't mean it's something that feels unusual and different to the children. It's part of the everyday sequence of teaching, but there is this extra element where teachers are really focusing on assessing one particular thing. It's designed to be summative and formative. Now that means the timing matters. So there's no point doing this right at the end of a unit of work where you don't have time to be that responsive teacher and act on the feedback. So depending on what the activity is, maybe about 2/3 of the way through. But this idea of summative assessment being a summation, being drawing together, it contributes to that overall judgment that a teacher might make at the end of a unit of work of what the children have achieved. We've put together two different kinds. One kind really focuses on working scientifically. Of course, that's never in isolation. There's always some kind of conceptual context for that to take place in. And then the other kind focuses more directly on a concept itself. I have to say it's actually the ones that focus on working scientifically that I think are particularly valuable. That's quite a tricky area to get to grips with, particularly if what you want to do is capture what children do in practice, in action, while they're doing hands-on practical work. Really importantly, what these items do is they suggest how teachers could plan in advance what they'll look for that's going to help them make that judgment. So there's some suggestions about what you might look for. So here's one example. This is one with a working scientifically focus. Basic information at the top telling you the kind of activity. This one was set in a context that's about forces, friction in particular. So if you imagine children zooming little balloon rockets along different kinds of strings, and then they're learning about friction in the process. The working scientifically focus is about how in that process they're thinking about how they use their results to draw conclusions and then making suggestions for how they would improve that. As well as the learning about friction, there's that specific assessment focus, which makes it easier for the teacher to manage assessing that for a whole class of 30 children. This is an example that focuses more on the concept, in this case electricity, how you might construct a simple electric circuit. And the idea is that a lot of these speak for themselves. I've tried to make them quite visual, so when you look at it, you quickly get the idea of what's going on here. And in this case, I think this example is particularly nice because it shows how the child's drawing, rather than their writing, is what's really communicated the information. Down at the bottom of the page here, there's a bit of text which really talks about what is it you'd be looking for. So what do we see as the benefits of these? Well, it makes the assessment more manageable. And you might hope that you could achieve this level of detail and focus in every single lesson. But actually having gone through some of these, when you're looking at that information afterwards, it takes a lot of time to process and think about it. And realistically, doing this several times a term rather than in every single lesson is probably more realistic. And that makes it popular because it's manageable. Most importantly though is it increases the validity of the judgments that you're making. We're all in danger, I think, of making assumptions about what we think children will do based on what they've done previously, or perhaps some unconscious bias that we've had. When I did this with a group of staff in a school in Weston-super-Mare, Welbury St Paul's, every teacher said that they were surprised by at least one of the outcomes for the children in their class. And that really matters, because it means rather than just depending on, oh yes, we all know our children, sometimes you need to stop and think, do I actually know my children? Do I need to think very carefully about what it is they're showing me and find some evidence? So perhaps we can't do it in that depth all the time, but sometimes we need to. Some other advantages would be that you can map out the different aspects of working scientifically that you're looking at across the year. Make sure that you're getting the full coverage, not always focusing on the same few things that feel safe to everybody. And also that subject leaders can use this as a way in for them to support colleagues. For example, you could take, as has happened, working with a colleague, working alongside to support them while the focused assessment is taking place. Gives you an opportunity to discuss it afterwards and really together come to some judgment about the learning that was taking place. And that's been a really powerful approach to CPD, really, particularly where teachers are feeling they've done so much work on English and maths recently that their science has been a bit neglected. And that increased professional confidence in your judgments, well, that matters again, because then we can have everyone being really sure and confident that what they're demonstrating and what they're saying about their children is secure and it's reliable. The importance of moderation to increase reliability. But again, focused assessments can be quite a useful focus for that.